secular reason. Once again, I told Christian David that I would record all of my replies to this guy who's pretty ridiculous, but here you go. Oh, and David, I asked several questions throughout the presentation. Obviously, some of them are rhetorical, but the ones that aren't, I would appreciate responses to, because I really am curious how this stuff works.
Neutrality is not practiced at the university, and we should have known as much because the Bible tells us quite clearly that the unbeliever has a very hostile mindset. The unbeliever is not even-handed and impartial in approaching the evidence about this world and man's place in this world and the nature of man and how we should live our lives.
It doesn't seem very honest to take every single unbeliever and put them all in the same category. Atheism is simply the rejection of the positive claim that a deity exists. That's it. That's all. Not everybody is happy. Not everybody is sad. Some people are depressed. Some are nihilistic. Just like religious people, there are a lot of irrational atheists as well. There's no way that you can discern anything universal about the group of people that simply don't believe that a deity exists. That is nonsensical. I really wish I could ask him personally some questions about this stuff, because he seems very confident that everything that he says is exactly right. And what he means by objective can't actually be figured out based on the context of this video. But I think what he means is that we don't have a doctrine or dogma to refer to, or to offer us presuppositions to pretend that we know answers, or a worldview that forces us to shoehorn in whatever information we can into our ideology to then call it objective and rational. He says that we're hostile, and the definition I have for that is unfriendly and antagonistic. Again, some people are and some people aren't. Some people do get upset with the church and state separation issues that come up, or electing officials that keep propagating their religious dogma that take rights away from women, or gives a foundation for some of the worst possible atrocities to ever be committed. If good people want to do good things, they do good things. If bad people want to do bad things, they do bad things. If somebody is religious, they can do something bad, and then they can find a passage in their Bible that will not only allow them to not feel guilty about it, but they can find a way to interpret it in which it actually encourages them to do so. I challenge anybody listening to this to think long and hard about something that a religious person of any denomination could do that a secularist or humanist couldn't also do, while also thinking about something bad that a religious person could do and justify it that couldn't be informed by the lack of belief in a deity, where the secularist would do the same thing. I have yet to find anything that fits that criteria. I don't think there is such a thing, but I'm open to listening if somebody can come up with something. You see, secularists, humanists, atheists simply don't have the dogma that tells them that they can do bad things, while making them feel like they are righteous and that those things are virtuous. 9/11 comes to mind. He really sounds like a cult leader to me that's preparing his flock for the unanswerable questions and objections to the tenets and dogma of Christianity. He's seriously divisive. He's telling them that unless other people think exactly as he thinks, which is obviously the only right way to think and to hold religious beliefs, that other people are not as good and that they have some kind of superior morality upper hand that can't be matched by anything else, while not actually giving any reasons why or how that is actually true. He seems to be saying these things while somehow not realizing that there are people of other denominations. There are Jehovah's Witnesses, there are Mormons, there are Scientologists, there are Hindus, Sikhs, Zoroastrians, that are all preaching basically the same thing, but referring to their own way of thinking as the one and only true way to find enlightenment, or to be spiritual, or to be one with God, or however people see that. There are many ways to pretend that you have the answers that you don't really have. But for a proposition, it is either true or not true, that your assertion is correct. And he makes so many that are unambiguously not true. Let me guess, you're going to say something rude or bigoted and justify it using your Bible, right?
Two very different mindsets that we encounter in this world, that of the believer and that of the unbeliever. In verse 17 of Ephesians 4, Paul says, "This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you no longer walk as the Gentiles also walk in the vanity of their mind." How do they walk?
It seems to me
As
that it would be just
open-minded,
as easy to find
objective
commonalities, not be
people
so
wanting to
divisive,
discover
and
the
actually build
truth
people up
wherever it
instead
may
of
be
knocking
found?
them down.
Absolutely not.
The two
told
biggest
you.
variables that affect
Maybe I'm
somebody's
psychic, or
religiosity
maybe professional
is
apologists
where
like
they
this
grew up,
say this kind
and
of
the
stuff all the
religion that
time
their parents
to
had,
justify
and
their
indoctrinated
bigotry,
them into
their hatred.
So the
and
arrogance is really
they're
odd to me. It's like
looking
they
down
think they
on
won
other
the
people.
lottery of where they were born, because it just so happens to be the country of the one and only true religion.
They walk in the vanity of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardening of the heart.
Well, wasn't this guy just a sweetheart? Yes, because people don't believe as you believe, they must be ignorant. Hardening of the heart? Really? Hearts pump blood. They don't do any thinking. You can't actually harden somebody's heart.
So he's assuming that somebody is
And
automatically
then if you
hostile
go
simply
down
because
in
they
your
don't buy
Bibles
into the
to verse
superstitions
20,
of his
you notice what Paul
ideology that he
says there,
holds so
but.
sacred that he's under the impression that he couldn't possibly
This is a very
be
important
wrong. I think
but.
he uses this hostility
Oh, I'm
thing
sure it
as
is, Craig.
justification
I'm listening.
for his own
Those
bigoted
who are
views against
unbelievers,
anybody who
Gentiles in their
opposes
mind,
his philosophies.
are openly
He's offering
hostile
these students a
to everything
preemptive
that is
strategy
holy and
for
good.
holding philosophies that are almost guaranteed to keep them closed off from any new information that might conflict with their current worldview. This religion is strange. It seems to want to keep people locked in a philosophical box with no way out.
But you didn't so learn Jesus. That's not the way you became a Christian. That's not the way you live your life. He goes on to talk about a completely different mindset. In verse 22, he says, that you put away as concerning your former manner of life the old man that waxes corrupt after the lust of deceit, and that you become renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new man that after God has been created in righteousness and true holiness. But you haven't learned Jesus that way.
He actually has no way of discerning how anyone listening to this did actually come to know this Jesus character. People come to believe and claim to know all of these different things in a lot of different ways. There are more denominations of Christianity than there are sentences in the Bible itself. And that's because rather than it being objective, like apologists claim that it is actually subjective. So subjective that some members of a congregation will move to a different church within the same denomination or in an entirely different denomination to find interpretations of the pastors and the clergy that matches their preconceived notions of what these things mean.
And so there you have it. Paul tells us quite clearly there's no neutrality in this world. There are two quite clearly antagonistic, conflicting, systematically opposed mindsets that you find. We can put it very simply. You have those who are covenant keepers with God, and you have those who are covenant breakers with God.
That sounds awfully like a false dichotomy, since you could likely sit down with 10 different members of the clergy or 10 different members of a church and ask them for their particular interpretation of a book in the Bible or even of a particular verse. And you're likely to find
there doesn't seem to be
all
any
of
wiggle
them
room
interpreted
something
quite
so
differently.
You have
I thought
those
these
who
things
will
were
not
written on our
live
hearts
subject
anyway.
to
So why would we
God's
need to learn
authority
that?
and the
But
way in which
regardless
He
of that,
regulates their lives. And then you have
there doesn't
those
seem
who,
to be
with
a
all
way
their
to live
heart,
subject
want more
to
and more
a
to learn
God's
to do that.
power that you don't actually believe in. This God doesn't seem to actually be detectable or have any characteristics that we can measure, that we can see, that we can actually demonstrate are more than simple delusions and assumptions and presuppositions and accepted a priori. That is, to accept a truth claim by default as apparently true or evidently true, but there doesn't seem to be any actual demonstrable evidence for the existence of this deity in order to follow these rules to begin with, or for these philosophies to be conflicted with, to have any kind of hostility about to begin with.
And so the first thing that you were to remember
What he is
about
encouraging
neutrality
is
is
actually really disturbing.
They aren't
What he is
neutral.
doing is setting these students
They
up
use
with a
double
philosophy
standards, selective
that will
consideration.
inform their
They have a
actions
hostile
in such a
mindset.
way
The second thing I
that
told
they
you should
will
know is that
be
you shouldn't be.
doxastically closed by default and actually double down when anything threatens their worldview. This divisive thinking and teaching is really unfortunate, as it also lends credence to other superstitions and otherwise potentially hazardous and demonstrably harmful philosophies like faith healing. Once people have this type of heuristic model of thinking, it's very easy to layer other supernatural or superstitious beliefs on top of those other ones. That leaves them open and vulnerable to charlatans and other types of scam artists out there. And it makes it very difficult for them to tell fact from fiction in all areas of life. With the increase of fake news and alternative facts, it's really important to follow a model that does actually consistently lead to what is true. Critical thinking and properly applied skepticism is the most intellectually honest position that we can hold, while something like faith is the opposite.
Before he went to his trial and then finally to the cross to die for the sins of his people, Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. And in that prayer, John 17, verse 17, you will see Jesus pray to his Father that the followers of Jesus be sanctified by the truth. The word sanctified here means consecrated or set apart. Jesus wants his followers to be unique, to be distinguished from the world.
So we're
He
supposed
wants
to
them
believe that
set
His word is
apart
truth,
and made
when He can
holy
also
or
send down strong
consecrated in a
delusions
particular
so
way.
people can
And what
believe what
Jesus
is
said
false,
is,
and
Father,
trick people and delude
sanctify
them
them
into thinking
by
they're doing
the
the right
truth.
thing when they are not.
Thy word
This is the same
is
omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent God that put two people into a garden, the Garden of Eden, knowing with complete foreknowledge exactly what was going to happen. And there was going to be this fall of man and the introduction of sin and the fall of man that would necessitate a scapegoat. So then he would have to sacrifice himself to create a loophole for the rules that he created to begin with.
So you shouldn't be neutral unless you think Jesus prayed for nothing at that point.
I'd be really interested to find out enough Christians of nothing.
Other
If somebody
people
made some kind of prayer,
regardless
some kind
of
request,
what was
or
stated,
made some
what
kind
was
of statement,
asked, what was said,
it couldn't
in the prayer
be for nothing.
in a post hoc fashion. They could simply revert back to their holy book and find something that is seemingly consistent with what was said. Even if it was simply utterances of consonants and vowels, it could be a Pentecostal speaking in tongues.
You shouldn't be neutral because in Matthew the 6th
This
chapter,
seems like
verse
a really
24,
sick form
Jesus
of
says quite
psychological
clearly that
slavery
it's
to
immoral.
me.
No man can
Especially
serve
since the
two
theology
masters.
this seems to
Teaches people
imply
that
that
they're
they're
bad,
bad,
they're
one master
born in
is
sin,
actually moral, and that kind of thing. And then the religion itself offers you the cure for the sickness that they are defining into existence. Dehumanizing concepts like that are unambiguously immoral. But then I have to wonder, if there's no God, then whose slave would we be? The very real and actual slavery that the Bible condoned,
He's going to end up
encouraged, and even
hating
sanctioned
one of them,
showed that
not
multiple
giving
masters
full
could be
allegiance
obeyed,
and loyalty
and that
to
the
one of
very
them. It's
idea
impossible
of there
to serve
being
two
a master is abhorrent.
It's impossible for you to have two ultimate authorities in your reasoning, two ultimate authorities guiding your life and conduct. You cannot serve
As far
two
as we can
masters.
actually
And so
tell, we don't
neutrality,
know that
the
this
idea
Jesus
that
character
you have
said
multiple
anything at all.
commitments out there
He
that
could have
are
simply
at
been a
war
magician
and are
in the Middle
conflicting
East
with
that
each
tricked
other, but
people
you're
out
going
of
to
their
do
money
justice
and
to all
perform
of them.
so-called
Jesus
miracles
says it's impossible.
because he was good at illusions.
Thirdly, you shouldn't try to be neutral because the Bible tells us quite clearly that if you are neutral, you'll be robbed of the ability to gain knowledge.
What an absolutely disgusting thing to instill in the minds of young people that are just maturing, going through life, trying to figure themselves out. This seems to be some weird reverse psychology projection. What really keeps people from knowledge is having cognitive biases, confirmation bias, ignoring cognitive dissonance, where you have this preconceived notion of what is actually right that is so ingrained that you count the hits and ignore the misses.
In Proverbs 1 verse 7, we read very clearly that the beginning, the chief point of knowledge, the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord.
Really? The almighty, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, creator of the universe needs you to fear him? I mean, let's get real. That's just ridiculous. I don't know why anybody would possibly believe that a loving deity that knows everything and is all-powerful would need his ego stroked by us believing in him and fearing him. even the whole faith thing is ridiculous, since we don't really to choose our beliefs in a simple sense. You can't just take somebody up to a high rise and tell them to forget about gravity and jump off. You can't do it. You can't just believe something simply to believe it. Christianity demands unrealistic expectations that really strips people of all their humanity.
Now, I don't know, many people have, I think, really misconstrued this notion of fearing God in our day. Maybe you've run into these points of view. Maybe you yourself are a little confused on this point. I hear people say from time to time, oh, God doesn't want us to be afraid of Him. And you read the Bible from cover to cover, and you hear people say that, and you say, have you read the same book I have? God doesn't want people to be afraid of Him? Let me tell you, it would be the height of irrationality for sinners not to be afraid of God.
How can someone choose to fear something that isn't even evidently true? It's also interesting that he's basically asserting that if somebody doesn't share the same interpretation as him, then they aren't a true Christian, or they aren't interpreting it right, because only his way is the correct method of interpreting the most ambiguous book ever written, ever conceived, ever interpreted, ever read. We're talking about the same book that has inspired more denominations than sentences that are in the book itself. Of course, people are going to squabble over the little fine details, but with something as seemingly important as somebody's eternal soul being on the line, with heaven and hell hanging in the balance, people don't even know if they have the rules of salvation correct enough that it might actually benefit them.
And when you have a reason to be afraid, you should be afraid of God, and not listen to these Pollyanna theologies that tell you, oh, there's nothing to be afraid of, God just loves everybody, don't worry about it.
Well, isn't that just a profound tautology, that if there's a reason to be afraid, you should really be afraid? But we need actual reasons to be afraid to begin with.
But even those who have gotten rid of their fear and trembling because of the fear of judgment are told that if they are to know anything, they are to fear God. They are to stand in a sense of awe and trembling before the awe and the wonder of who God is.
Seemingly, somebody could wonder all their lives who this God character is and still not get a sufficient or even clear answer. And that seems glaringly obvious when somebody can use the exact same passage. Well, since you throw the word truly in there, really good it must obviously be true that we couldn't know anything at all. Too. It's a good thing that we have these passive-aggressive thinking about the Lord. I'm sure it'll keep people almighty power. These horrible ideas actually influencing people is kind of comical to me, but at the same time, it's really, really sad. A lot of this sounds like a really unhealthy, abusive relationship.
To know anything at all. No, when Paul says all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are deposited in Christ, he means all knowledge. All the knowledge that you have about physical education or physics. All the knowledge that you have about handwriting or English literature. All of the knowledge that men have is deposited first in Christ.
Oh, I'm sure an all-knowing, all-powerful God would inspire this passage. So of course we need to be reminded that that people don't take credit for and timeless, spaceless, immaterial being progress would obviously need some human reassurance that it actually and of course we have to remain humble. We can't be too prideful that created that's us just naughty. In His image, to then say, "This is all actually mine. You get it all from me."
And then in verse 8, he says, you be careful that no one robs you through his philosophy and vain deceit. Robs you of what? Well, of course, you know, because we've just talked about treasures, that's what Paul
Obviously,
is
the
referring
word
to.
rob here
Beware
is used
that
colloquially.
people don't rob you
That
of
a
the treasures of
philosophy is going
knowledge.
to
And how would they
rob
do
somebody
that?
of their
He
knowledge.
says they would rob
I mean,
you
give me a
through their
break.
philosophies
You know, I wonder
and
if this
vain
is a
deceit,
defense mechanism
which are
placed
after the
into the
tradition of men,
theology to keep people from actually being free
after the
thinking and
elementary
looking at things
principles of the
from a
world,
truly objective perspective to
and
actually
not
come to a conclusion that
Christ.
makes sense and actually comports with reality rather than superstitions.
This leads to another thing that we need to discuss tonight, not only the question of being competent to answer all of the attacks that are brought against the faith by learning to think as a Christian, bringing every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And secondly, we've looked at the issue of neutrality, how they aren't and you shouldn't be. But thirdly, you need to see, as this text that we've just read makes clear, that when someone disagrees with your Christian faith, they are not simply expressing a disagreement about one isolated particular point over against one isolated particular point or belief that you have. What is really going on here is that you have two warring philosophies.
So what he's saying is if somebody has a question about one thing, it isn't just one thing. It's about the entire ideology of the religion itself that is obviously being attacked because somebody has a question. How dishonest. I don't really see the war of philosophies either. Assertions rise and fall on their own merits. I guess I do see the battle, though.
It seems to me that in every other
people to be
area of
intellectually
discourse,
honest and not assert and pretend to know
rationality,
things that they
reason,
can't
and
actually
logic
know. Where they
take
have this
precedent.
presuppositional attitude.
And religion is the
where
only
they
exception to
pretend
that,
to know things that
where
they couldn't possibly
believing
know.
things
Simply
a
assert
priori
them without validating
until
them.
it's proved otherwise
And then
is
look at
considered virtuous.
The person
with
that doesn't
literally
believe those things
anything
is
else.
irrational.
The null hypothesis is the most rational position. Until we learn and receive new information that we can interpret and evaluate and verify, which then becomes knowledge, do we claim to actually have knowledge? We have a culture where it's acceptable to be skeptical about anything else except for the ideas that religion has. There's a tribe called the Paraha in South America. They have no word or concept of any kind of God. So even if Christians went there to engage in civil discourse, their philosophy doesn't inform them of a God. So that would create this situation where there's these warring philosophies. So who is causing the war in that case? Would it be the neutral position or the philosophy that says that you should believe things regardless of evidence?
He doesn't forbid studying philosophy. Moreover, what Paul tells us here is that we're supposed to be cautious not of all philosophy, but of a particular kind of philosophy that he describes very clearly. That philosophy which is vain deceit, after the tradition of men, and after the elementary principles of the world. He says, be careful about that kind of philosophy, because it'll rob you. It'll bring you down. It'll be a real bummer for you if you get tied into that way of thinking.
Yeah, what a bummer it would be to actually look at things rationally and
But don't
honestly.
you worry,
Not
you'll be
ascribe
comfortable,
meaning
safe,
onto everything,
and even live forever
if
to
you simply follow
make
this
it
doctrine
fit
your preconceived notion
psychological
of what it's
and
supposed to
philosophical
be, based on an
imprisonment
ideology
is the direct
that
net
forces
result
you
of
to
these
believe,
types of teachings
believe or suffer
that really
forever,
need to go the way
and
of
make
the
sure you don't
dinosaur.
lean on your own understanding.
While realizing
even though
that
you
the
have to
only
lean on
way
your own
to
understanding
have an
in
intellectually
order to
honest
understand
worldview
that you don't want to lean
that
on
really
your
does
own
actually
understanding.
map or comport to reality
is to start with the elementary principles of the world that says that the universe is materialistic particles that are obeying their equations of motion. Is there more than that? Maybe. Can it be demonstrated? Not yet.
Same way. They do not have the same methods. They do not have the same.
It seems incredibly immoral to me to teach young students to lay down their theology first, possibly come to the same, and then with any new information, see if it comports with theology rather than reality or demonstrate. It seems to me that theology confirmation requires gullibility, and cognitive gullibility has to be a violation of confirmation bias that says we should make the fewest assumptions as possible to get the best results. Well, Greg, an intellectually honest person wouldn't assert that it is impossible. They would simply start with the null hypothesis, where it simply didn't happen until it is demonstrated. It's the same rationality and position that people hold for things like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. The James Randi Foundation, founded by a famous magician, for years has had a $1 million challenge for anybody that can demonstrate that they can actually do something supernatural. Guess how many times that was actually demonstrated? Yep, not a single time. Not a single time were we even able to identify a mechanism by which that we would determine something to be supernatural. If someone claimed that monkeys flew out of their ass, you would ask for justification and evidence. It's the same thing here. We don't have a single reason to believe something can break all known laws of physics and science. You have got to be joking. Believing things does not make them true in and of itself. I could assert that I have universe-creating pixies living in my underwear drawer that are the arbiter of all things natural, supernatural, the creator of the universe, and the justification for morality, all of metaphysics, and all of the miracles claimed to have happened. That doesn't make it true, and most people would agree that would be very silly to actually believe that.
It all depends upon the presuppositions you bring to the facts.
People can have their own opinions, beliefs. Facts are facts, and they consistently and reliably. But you can't have your own investigation. Facts are those things that we can actually any kind of opposition. He is fallaciously implying that if you start things like miracles and the resurrection, that a resurrection could happen, then that makes it true. Which is why he's telling the number of people believing something, how long they believe for it to be true, or how sincere they are about it. He's basically saying that if you start the validity of a claim, then you'll continue to believe it, because you can just use self-validating methods.
In 1 Timothy 6, verse 20, the Apostle Paul tells Timothy to beware of that which is knowledge falsely so called, pseudo-knowledge.
Pseudo-knowledge, that must be the cousin of pseudoscience, like is used to pretend to validate creationism, and tarot cards, and astrology, and psychics, and ghosts, and demons, and gods, and whatever else you can dream up.
Everyone, whether they're a believer or an unbeliever of whatever kind, of whatever stripe, whatever flavor or brand, everyone takes things for granted. Everyone has those things which they no longer question, but they just assume in their approach to the world. Everyone has standards by which they think we can discover more truth about the world. Everyone has things they take for granted that limit
But
what
rational
they think
people
can
don't
be
start
real
off that
or
way.
not.
They don't start off.
He is conflating
with
basic
assumptions
beliefs
or presuppositions
like the law
that
of
can't be
identity,
independently
non-contradiction,
verified
and excluded
and
middle,
are actually a
the
solid
logical
foundation
absolutes.
for contrasting truth
His
statements.
theology,
like many
so
of the
he's
assertions
basically
made
saying
by
that
the Bible.
it's
Since
so
everybody
vague
does it, he can
that
do it too.
people
Like the
can
adult
make
version
just
of,
about,
well, you
virtually
started
any
it,
claim
so
they
I
wanted
can do
to,
this too,
and then
and
go
assume
back
that
and
this
find
is
a
true
verse
and make it fit by shoehorning in what they think is right.
You have those. You go to the market, and on your way out at the checkout stand, you see the National Enquirer and the Star and other newspapers like that. You see the headlines. Oh, there's obviously evidence. This girl gave birth to her own father, it says. I remember reading that one day.
This kind of sounds like the parthenogenesis that took place with the teen virgin Mary and the spontaneous pregnancy of a teenage virgin.
I didn't think I was going to get out of the store without just busting up. Somebody put that as a headline. This girl gave birth to her own father. But then again, you see, if I'm going to be completely neutral and not biased and so forth, I can't say what are the limits of reality. I should look into that, right? I should be open-minded and go examine the facts. Nobody operates that way.
But you can actually be neutral and not assume that it is true until it has actually been shown to actually be true. He is conflating some ridiculous Inquirer story with,
well, of course, people
what
can
happens
use
in the
whatever method
Bible
they
and
want
the
to, and
theology
apparently
surrounding
they actually do
to
that.
insinuate or pretend that he can't.
But
be
something like the
neutral about a
scientific
ridiculous
method,
claim,
is
the
wholly
one method
dishonest.
that consistently
Of course
and
he can
reliably
be.
leads to what
Everybody's
is
got a
actually
philosophy
true,
of life
because we can
that tells
actually
them
take
what-
measurements
because
of
they take it for
reality,
granted,
we can
tells
conduct
them
experiments and
what
look
the
for
standards for
duplication
discovery are,
of
what the
the
limits of
variables
reality
that
are,
we're actually
what our
looking at
methods
to see
should
what
be.
comports with reality. And then, since we are actually trying to apply Occam's razor and be as neutral as possible while introducing the fewest assumptions possible with new information, we can actually make new decisions, hold a new position if it's more rational,